My name is Twaronite, and I just want to say welcome, and I'm just so pleased to see you all here, and thank you again for the library for inviting us here and opening your doors so we could share some poetry. It has been a long 3 years. This is my first live reading. I've tried these Zoom readings, as many of you have, and tried Zoom meetings, and I'm frankly sick of Zoom meetings, but but we're slowly trying to get back to normal. And and for some of us, it's not only been a long 3 years, it's been truly heartbreaking and tragic. So we've lost too many of us. So that we can be here today sharing some poetry together is very meaningful to me. So anyways, just want to give you a little bit about myself. Some of you already know, but I've been writing and publishing in a variety of genres, as you can see out here on my book table, ever since my early 20s. And I'll let you do the math by looking at me. But I came rather late to poetry. During high school and college, the few poems I did read or was forced to read seemed written in such high-sounding, esoteric language as if they were meant only for some high priesthood of readers and critics. Poetry didn't speak to me then, and like some people, I was apprehensive about it. I didn't get it. And so it wasn't until probably around in the 80s, I remember distinctly something happened to me. I was browsing through a bookshop in Hanover, New Hampshire. I used to live in New Hampshire, and it was near Dartmouth College. And as I usually do, I love bookstores of any kind, and I'm just aimlessly wandering through the aisles, and I found myself in the poetry aisle. And a certain book caught my attention by its unusual title. Title is Geography 3. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was the last published book by the late, great Elizabeth Bishop. And I just happened to look at it, and I just happened to open it to this one remarkable poem of only 19 lines. And the title of the poem was One Art. And if you haven't already read that poem and familiar with it, I highly recommend you look it up, One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. And I remembered looking at it and says, wow, this is, I understand what she's talking about. It's written in very simple, accessible language, but it's very dramatic. And it's all about the art of losing things. That's life, we lose things. And I was totally blown away by it. I probably blurted out right there in the bookshop, I get this. I understand exactly what she's saying. And from that moment, I resolved to myself that maybe I could write poems. And because I was still fascinated, even though it turned me off much of poetry, I was fascinated by the compressed emotion, how you can take in so few words and create a whole world there on the page. And that's what fascinated me about it. And so I said, yes, it's possible to do this. But it's probably another 10 years after that I actually started writing and publishing poems and started even referring to myself as a poet. So these next few poems are from my 4th collection of poetry, published by Kelsey Books, and we've had a good relationship with that publisher. It's a small press, but they put out some very beautiful books if you check out their website. And maybe you've had this experience, those of you who refer to yourselves as writers or poets, someone will come up to you either at a party or in an elevator maybe and say, oh, what do you do? As in, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm retired from a variety of jobs that other than poetry, that actually put food on the table and, kept things going and supported my writing habit. Okay, but I do now refer to myself as a poet. So if you tell them I'm a poet, they just give you a blank stare, right? So what do you really do? Okay? So I've decided to come up with a job description. And so here it is, the poet's job. Watch through the window to right of things in plain view. like the lone black thong flapping defiantly in a sea of white briefs. Listen to the soft tickety sounds an empty wrapper makes, skimming along the sidewalk, and find there a symphony. Turn everything into something else. Make the words go incognito until their true identities are revealed. Explore dark ovens and castles of abuse, where muses often lurk. Feel the earth quaking and bear witness. Express the ineffable with disappearing ink. Start with one word and sail the world. Mourn the spaces left behind when there are no words. Thank you. I've long been an Edward Hopper fan, and I'm kind of intrigued by the settings he creates, that just, and the full of alienation, or you think so, and just kind of weird, like at night there's a lit up gas station on a lonely road or something like that. But I've also been fascinated by the people in his paintings. Okay, and you're an artist, you know what I'm talking about, right? So here's a poem dedicated to the people. Hopper's People. I stare impolitely, captivated by the artist's ensnaring strokes that demand we enter and drink in every detail. The roundness of breast and dune, the letter received and the slim body folding like a dying flower. The man sitting on a bed next to the reclining woman and a book unread. The bright stocking legs beneath the table when all else seems dark. The fading faces as the distance between them grows. The flaming orange dress and the cleavage of land and sky by sea. Some see resignation in their faces and a sense of quiet defeat. But as two nighthawks plot their next move, I see only defiance and resolution, that come the dawn, they will break free of the artist's bonds and leave this bird behind, while I am still locked in that bright diner next to two empty seats. Thank you. This next poem, I should say something about this collection. This is my most it's my fattest poetry book, so it actually shows good on the shelf, but it's my most wide-ranging. I've tried some other forms besides my usual free verse. This next poem is an example of a prose poem. Quite simply, some people look at it as a hybrid. What do you mean, prose poem? It's either prose or poem, but a prose poem basically is written in sentences. Usually it's in a block form, block paragraph form. It has no line breaks, which is a very important tool if you're a poet, all right? And jam it, going on to that next line. Well, you abandon that, but you still use some other devices, some of the same devices the poets use. And more poets are using prose poems. Goes back to Charles Baudelaire, started writing prose poems. And you'd be surprised how many famous poets they are experimenting with that. So this is my own version. Loved to madness. She stared at the bedpan, disgusted, yet thankful for its reassuring contents and for still knowing what shit was. Nurse aide Kara helped her up for a sponge bath. Coyly resisting, she pulled her arms tightly across her breasts. Looking deeply into Kara's eyes, she smiled and surrendered, opening her arms as if to embrace a secret lover. As each part of her body was washed, she tensed, shivered, and moaned. At last, she burst out with an ecstatic cry that came from a place as foreign as the moon. Exhausted and bemused, she lay back on her pillow. She was not an erotic being, of that she was sure. Sex had always left her with a feeling of empty release, no more satisfying than a good bowel movement. It's not that she hadn't tried. Dutifully, she would moan and arch her body for lovers, often at inappropriate times. Before a date, she would practice in the mirror, touching herself tenderly, rehearsing aloud as if from a script. But her lovers never bought it, and neither did she. In her literature classroom, it was a different story. For her students, she had called forth the universe of fictional characters dwelling inside her, channeling their words and passions into live performances. She became Emma Bovary, liberated from a dull life and marriage. She became Thomas Hardy's tragic beauty, Eustacia Vi, whose exotic dark-haired looks she fancied herself sharing. Here in the classroom, she lived more truly than anywhere else, conjuring up every scene down to the smell of smoke from the wild Egdon Heath. She often wondered if she could ever feel Eustacia's one great desire, to be loved to madness. One day, during a sponge bath, she became strangely quiet and calm, as if focusing all the memories still left to her. She turned to Kara and demanded what she longed to hear. "Is that you, Damon? Do you love me now? Tell me, I will know it." Kara thought quickly, back to a novel she often lived in, thanks to a grandmother from Dorset, in whose heart the heath still burned. She answered in a husky voice, "Yes, Eustacia, I do love you. Where do you wish to go?" Well, I had a request to read the title poem from the book, Shopping Cart Dreams, and as I actually took this photograph down in our local Santa Cruz River, and of course, 2 weeks later, after this perfect setting, someone had uprighted the carts and totally ruined the scene for me. So I'm glad I got down there. Shopping cart dreams. They dream of the old days when a cart's true metal was measured by the number of aisles and parking spaces traveled. How much it could carry of premium thread count linens, plush bath towels for soft tushes, avocados, chips, and salsa for the Super Bowl crowd, computers, big screen TVs, and other Black Friday deals, colorful wrap bundles of Christmas joy. Never dreaming of a future overflowing with the bedding, bags, and boxes that hold a life together. Wheeling through endless streets and alleyways until their toil's over, they take one last journey on worn rubber feet into the wash by the underpass, their metal skeletons now filled with the debris of all they once carried. Okay, got to project, all right. All right. Sometimes my voice kind of trails off, and I have to really work at that. I don't know if you're reading poetry, many of us have that same problem. Okay, doppelganger. This was inspired by a little adventure I had in a bar up on the rooftop bar in Manhattan. Doppelganger. As the young woman leaned across the bar to inform me I was her doppelganger, I did a double take, in light of the fact that she lacked a silver beard and was every bit as ebony as I am ivory. But what she really meant was her style double, since she fancied my Akubra hat and the way it pulled together my casual rock t-shirt look, an exact replica of the look she hoped to someday create. And I went home sensing the presence of another inside me, who looked at her face in the mirror and saw mine. Well, in my early days, my wife Josie and I lived in a one-room schoolhouse in northern New Hampshire. And it was built in 1858, one of the original schoolhouses, so it was quite an adventure. So I wrote this sonnet about that time. Shallow well. I lived in the woods where I learned to get by with a shallow dug well and 3 feet of water. Each summer, I peered down and watched as the level of water slowly receded. At times it hit bottom and I would curtail my use until the precious flow came back, as it always did. In those surface days, it was enough to survive and there was no need to go deep. I wonder if the well is still there. Would I look down now and see dry, crusted pebbles and something long dead? It's hard to get by on 3 feet of water. The waters grow harder to reach as my soul draws down to find what it needs. Well, this is about journeying. I love journeys. Look forward to taking some more journeys. Journey by layers. We journey by layers. First, the outer skin is shed serpent-wise, leaving behind all schedules, rituals, and detritus of daily life to scatter in the wake of our departure. At each destination, we peel away another layer, losing ourselves by degree in going from here to there, leaving a trail of things we thought essential, until at last we arrive, our suitcase in tatters. Better not to open it. Well, here's another Manhattan adventure in my early days. Mortal danger. Waiting for a crosslight in Manhattan, I grabbed the drunken man in mid-fall, holding him up with all my strength, his huge frame threatening to bring us both down in crashing ruin. For a moment, I held him steady, propping him against a traffic pole to deal as best he could in his battle with gravity. Reprimand came swiftly from startled companions who spoke of my mortal danger in trying to rescue another lost soul on the street. He could have knifed me, they said, or strangled me in delirious struggle. I did not think, I told them. It was just a reaction. They made me promise never to do that again. In the years since, I have walked around, stepped over, and ignored hundreds of fallen men without a passing thought until today. I am not the same person I was, and doubtless could not hold such a man up if I tried. And I'm much slower to react, especially when I know I shouldn't. And what did it matter that I stopped to prop up a man doomed to fall the moment I left him? I wear no halo for my impulse, nor entertain the slightest doubt I was in any real danger, except maybe from having to hear the thud of a dead weight as his face hit the ground. The danger may not be mortal, but it can kill you just the same. Back to New Hampshire. Early days in New Hampshire, remember the schoolhouse? Well, wanted to keep the historic look around it. And that means keeping the lawn mown around it, which means getting a lawnmower. Ugh. Tossing toads. I halt my mower and gently toss my neighbor to safety from the whirling lethal blades, then resume the ritual and repeat, saving as many as I can, only to send them back onto a wider stage, to be swallowed headfirst by a garter snake, or stabbed by a heron, flattened by a car. 1,000 toads die as I ponder their fate. At least the mower is quick, with not a shred of moral pretense. No toad would die from my hand were I not to run this infernal gas-belching machine across this green desert. I am but one more accomplice to murder on a larger scale, this blood be on my hands. For now, we play out our parts, toad savior coming to the rescue of the toad in her breeding pool with 10,000 eggs, while deaths pile up on the stage until at last the play is done and all the breeding pools of life are gone and no one's left to save any of us. Well, we got a new term over the past 3 years. We came up with a new phrase, social distance. Here we are, social distance. Social distance. The distance from grip to the stinging tip of a bullwhip. The distance between two arms spread wide. The distance in which two breaths mingle. The distance to the end of a leash. The distance across that door at the end of Titanic. The distance growing like continental drift. The distance to the next island country of one. Here's another kind of poem. I don't know how many of you heard of a found poem, or they call it sometimes discover poems. A found poem, as the name implies, is constructed entirely out of lines that you find exactly as you find them on the page. Like you'd be reading the Bible, the Constitution, anything with text in it, Declaration of Independence, and so on. And so basically, you look for those lines that really jump out at you and write them down. And then the magic begins, because what's the creativity in that? Well, now you're going to rearrange them into some new order so that they make sense to you. You're going to create something entirely new from this. So this poem is entirely constructed out of U.S. state mottos. All of these are state mottos. Okay? U.S. state mottos. The motto of each country. I mean, each state. What do they say? State mottos. Okay, so we have 50 state mottos. You can look those up on Google. So just remember that these are just, and I've just kind of rearranged them and used some of them. It grows as it goes. If you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you. The life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. I have found it, the star of the north, the crossroads of America. Let the welfare of the people be the supreme law. Liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. Equality before the law. Wisdom, justice, and moderation. All for our country and battle born. Live free or die. Manly deeds, womanly words. Oh, we could figure that one out. By and by, it grows as it goes, ever upward, to the stars through difficulties, to be rather than to seem. While I breathe, I hope she flies with her own wings. Well, these days it seems like everybody seems to be talking about the end times. You know, things are getting really bad sometimes, and you can't even listen to the news. But so I wrote this piece, End Times in the Produce Aisle. As I reached for the organic cucumber, a woman wearing a polka dot dress over pajama bottoms and bunny slippers grabbed for the same one. With our hands clutching opposite ends of the vegetable as if it meant the difference between survival and a slow wasting death, we locked eyes in a grim battle of foraging supremacy. Go ahead, take it, she said, shaking her head. What does it matter? Who needs a cucumber? Haven't you heard? It's the end times. Now, normally, I try not to get into discussions while shopping, where I find desolation and abomination aplenty, not to mention tribulations in the checkout line. But the woman looked so distraught, even the bunnies on her slippers had little screamy faces. Oh, it's not as bad as that, is it? Look at this tomato. Have you ever seen such a masterpiece? Almost ashamed to eat it. I'd put it on my mantle if I could. I paused and smiled at the woman, but she wasn't buying it. You poor stupid schmuck, she said. Just go buy your beautiful tomato and don't forget your cucumber. Make yourself a divine salad and enjoy your last meal while you look out your window and watch the world end. Her comment returned me to the salad I planned to toss that night, and I grabbed a head of romaine and some radishes. What makes you think the world is coming to an end? I asked, as non-judgmentally as I could, deciding while I was at it to grab some carrots, mushrooms, and a red cabbage. Open your eyes, she said. Downtown's underwater and the hills are on fire. They're rioting in the streets and the locusts are eating everything. Arabs and Jews still at each other's throats. 40 countries now at war, while nuclear weapons are being baked like cookies. And just look at that wilted lettuce. What is the world coming to? Tears streamed down her face and she began to wail and gnash her teeth, which for some reason I have always found irresistibly appealing, though the streaks and gobs of mascara around her eyes made her look like a crazed panda. There, I said, which seemed at the time a pretty dumb thing to say, but was all I could think of, having recently heard it in a Turner Classic movie starring Jimmy Stewart. Tenderly, I dabbed her eyes with my handkerchief, which fortunately was still unused that morning. I put my arm around her and we walked together out the store, stopping only briefly in the checkout line to pay for my produce. And that night, we made a salad that couldn't be beat, then gripped each other tightly and watched in wonder as the sun got redder and redder in the west, swelling to twice its size before bursting apart into those magic colors you see only at times like these. I owe that poem to James Tate. I was reading a James Tate poem. He was describing this sunset. He said, we just don't have words to describe the colors you see. I mean, he went on and on about the colors, and it just so fascinated me. So I kind of borrowed that idea about what colors would you see when the sun bursts. So, I'm reversing the order of my, I'd like to read just a few poems before I end from my other collections. And yesterday's decision by the Supreme Court kind of made me choose this poem from, this is my first collection, Trash Picker on Mars. And one poem especially spoke to me about, perfect for this occasion. Better to own a house. It's my body, you say, but not if you're a woman. It's not like property. There you have real rights, possession, exclusion, disposition, enjoyment. With a house, you get to decide who can enter and who can stay. With your body, men have all the keys. They'll open your vagina and lock up your womb. They'll cover your body with a tent to resist temptation, then cut your clitoris to rob you of pleasure. You can sell a house, but not your body. For that you need a pimp. He'll work you till you bleed and keep all the profit. Better to own a house than a body. This my second collection, Museum of Unwearable Shoes, and this photo was inspired, actually the whole title poem was inspired by a trip through the Tucson Mall, where during the summer I'll become a mall walker. When it's 110 degrees, well, where do you go? The gym is closed, so where do you go to the mall? So during the past few years, many of us have returned to reading George Orwell's 1984. It was one of the bestsellers on Amazon a while back. And this line, I really read it myself, this line really spoke to me. This is from 1984. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. George Orwell. All that was needed. Keep telling yourself it never happened. Wage relentless assault on all evidence to the contrary. Vanquish doubt as you double down on the message. Memorize, then swallow. Fix it firmly like a favorite song in the jukebox memory of your hippocampus. Play it again and again as you reimagine the past. Well, here's the title poem, The Museum of Unwearable Shoes. The mall has many wonders, and most amazing of all is the Museum of Unwearable Shoes, where perched on glass pedestal displays of torture, you'll find multi-strap leather sculptures adorned in beads and buckles that bind and pinch with exquisite agony, and 6-inch gravity-defying dagger stilettos, guaranteed to make a woman look sexy, except for bunions and the moment her face meets the earth. I've moved around a lot, bought houses and so on. So, and I get back to that poem by Elizabeth Bishop, One Art, about losing things, losing places, losing even people we love. And it got back to, and so I was inspired by that poem to write my own version. Rehearsal. Of all I have owned, Mountain View cabin, 2 quaint houses, acres of woodlands with mossy boulders and hidden brooks, gardens I planted, left for someone new, books and treasures collected over a lifetime, red MGB of my youth, Plymouth van of middle age, Toyotas of autumn. The best part lay in leaving them. Whatever pleasure I derived was quickly forgotten in the moment of release. Only then did I know the perverse satisfaction of letting go. Possessions still come, then depart with no regret. Each time is a rehearsal. No longer bound to my fancy, I am once again free. One step closer to a self unencumbered by holding. One step closer to leaving. I have to share this one that, I was writing about women there and trying to understand. I can't, all I can do is imagine what it's like to be a woman. But same way, thinking about another race, to put ourselves in the shoes of that person. We can't say, I know how you feel. Well, no, you don't, okay? But you can at least try to imagine how that person feels. So I was watching a video of a young black poet just describe the life that he lived, which fed his poetry. And I had to at least try to write this poem after hearing the young black poet. After hearing the young black poet speak, my first reactions were sadness, rage, and wonder at our different worlds. He writes of the bullet he knows has his name on it. Well, I write again of my imminent decrepitude. He writes of all the times he was stopped and frisked. Well, I write of indignities suffered at airport security. He writes how his great-great-great-grandfather was sold and branded like cattle. Well, I write of how my Lithuanian grandfather's name got butchered at Ellis Island. He writes of how it felt to watch the first black president compared to a monkey. Well, I write of how my big ears always turned red whenever kids laughed at them. He writes of the pain that won't go away after seeing his son killed because a policeman felt threatened. Well, I write of the day a policeman's wife shot her husband dead in the bedroom above us, and I felt sad for my poor dad cleaning bits of brain off the walls. He writes, knowing that for some, he will always be less of a man, while I write, whole and secure. We explore the separate flows of our lives, holding them back against time, diving for words in quiet pools of reflection. But it's a wonder his dam doesn't burst. And this last poem from this collection was inspired by something that the poet Ray Armantrout, an observation she made about emptiness. And I don't remember the exact quote, but she said that emptiness makes us feel uncomfortable. We go in to see this vast emptiness around us. Some Europeans come to this country and they see all this empty space. And, whoa, and they're not used to this. So I decided to make my answer to her quote. Whenever I see empty. Whenever I see empty, I seek to fill it, whether it needs filling or not, inserting my vanity into spaces undefiled by actuality, as if I could fill the vacuum between the stars and electrons, as if I could fill the gulf between us, no matter how close you seem, as if I could fill your vacant stare so you don't have to be there alone, as if I could fill all the holes and lonely places within me, as if I could fill the blank slate with words enough to keep the void at bay. And my third collection, and this was kind of unusual. I got some support from, I actually brought this out during the pandemic, and it's a collection of my, it's new and selected poems of my sci-fi and fantasy poems. What the Gargoyle Sees. How many of you like Gandalf? Any Gandalf lovers? Okay. Wizards at heart. A flash of light bursts from the wizard's wand, ancient powers unleashed, a legerdemain of photons, enchanting us in the darkness of our deepest longings. We know the magic is not real, yet we believe it still. We are all magicians at heart, conjuring up gods and worlds, even our own existence, out of the power of mind. We are each a holy trinity of word, thought, and image, endlessly inventing our lives with new realities. We hurl ourselves into space, bending its fabric to fit the models we construct. We are tricksters of time, stretching moments to infinity. Dinosaurs dance on Broadway while zombies never die. We foresee our future in heaven while hosts of our enemies descend by decree into hells filled with delicious horrors. Modern day magi, we come bearing gifts for the child within. We cast our spells against the sun and tides, commanding them to stop. And who shall say they won't when you're a wizard? One more poem I'd like to show you, and getting back to Elizabeth Bishop's poem, One Art. I said it was 19 lines, and that probably gave you a little clue here. It was actually not free verse at all. It was a very difficult form of poetry called a villanelle, going back centuries. I think the French or the Italians, they're arguing about who invented it, but anyways, many poets have since experimented with it. But it's a venerable style of poetry, and it involves a very specific rhyme sequence. And you'll notice there's always, in like her poem One Art, there's two lines that go back and forth, and kind of as if they're speaking to each other across the page. They're kind of interacting with each other. And that's the way to look at a villanelle. Especially if you have a strong line in mind, you're thinking about writing a poem, some strong line comes to mind, maybe you can think of another one, and the two lines, maybe there's some chemistry between them that you can take up in a poem. And I think that's, so I had to try my own. And this is my attempt at a Villanelle. And this goes back to when I lived in New England. I was always, something about walking through cemeteries always fascinated me, especially in the late afternoon and fall. There's a certain kind of light around 4 o'clock. You know, the shadows grow longer, and you're walking through the cemetery, and it all looks very mysterious, and as it falls on the monuments, and you know, and that's, well, on Halloween, of course, we get really, you know, this is the place to be. But so anyways, that certain light that I saw in cemeteries, 4 o'clock light. In the 4 o'clock light of a fall afternoon, the realm of reason gives way to wonder. The vision of old is gone too soon. Stone lichens read like an ancient rune, of Odin casting my thoughts asunder in the 4 o'clock light of a fall afternoon. Do I dare emerge from my sane cocoon to mine the ruins of a mythic world under in the 4 o'clock light of a fall afternoon? Is it Loci who tricks my spirit to swoon and feeds this phantasmagoric hunger? The vision of old is gone too soon. I wish to ride in Mani's chariot moon and wield the mighty hammer of thunder. The vision of old is gone too soon. For an instant, the solid rock is hewn as the inner child is freed to wander in the 4 o'clock light of a fall afternoon. The vision of old is gone too soon. I made one mistake. I forgot to read one poem in here, so I'd like to go back to it because to me it's a very important poem to me. Where it is? All right, there it is. Okay. I skipped it. There it is. This is another, the reason I wanted to just say this one last poem, it's another different form that I've been experimenting with. It's called a sestina. Again, I have Elizabeth Bishop to thank for this, because she wrote a poem, I think it was called A Miracle at Breakfast. And it was a sestina. And I read it first and I said, whoa, you know, it's a strange poem because it had these 6 words that were repeated at the end of the poems in a precise sequence. And it's very formulaic poem. 39 lines exactly. Those 6 words are repeated at the end of each stanza, but in different sequences throughout. And then in the last 3 lines, all 6 words have to appear. So I said to myself, why in hell would anyone go to that bother trying to write such a complicated poem? But I had written this poem originally as a free verse. And there's something that it just lay there. It didn't do what I wanted to do. And I noticed with her poem, there's a certain magic. And she just described this simple event at breakfast, but she turned it into this magical, mystical experience by writing it as a sestina. So I took her tip, and I actually had her poem next to me kind of as a model. So I wrote my own about a childhood experience of mine. Ocean in a jar. And this is the last poem, I promise. 2 families sharing a cottage at the ocean. What could go wrong? Except for endless rivers of water that poured from the sky and held the world in suspension. As we waited to see if fishes would soon appear and we could swim through the air to catch them in a jar. As our parents hid in the kitchen and filled jar after jar with gin, we stared at the ocean, wishing only to return and swim again in our ancestral womb of water, breathing through new sprouted gills like fishes held in evolutionary suspension. It was then that I remembered a kind of suspension for which all you need is paper, pencil, scissors, and a jar. First you draw and cut out some fishes to populate your ocean. You fill the jar with water, then shake and twirl to make them swim. And keep it going so they appear to swim with sufficiently fervent suspension of disbelief so that you come to see the water swirling round and round in the jar transfigured into an ocean of schooling fishes. Soon everyone wanted their fishes, spinning their jars to make them swim in their tiny oceans, held in fixated suspension by a simple jar of water. Who was that audacious boy who made the water come to life with swirling fishes in a pickle jar, spinning his trick to make them swim? Was it some magical suspension of reality to make us all see there an ocean? I wish that boy with his jar of water turned to ocean were here to make the fishes swim again and hold the world in suspension. Thank you very much.